How's it going, guys? I'm Mike Dwyer from the Bunker Recordings and BetterMixes.com, and today I want to talk to you about drum samples. I've been seeing a lot of people in the audio world talk down on the use of drum samples, saying that it's cheating, or that it automatically makes your drums sound flat and lifeless, or the same as everybody else's. But ultimately, drum samples are just another tool to make your mix sound the way you want. So in this video, I want to talk about a few different reasons why you might want to use drum samples. So I've got a session up here. This is actually from the first song I ever recorded at my first home studio. So needless to say, the raw drum tones have some problems. So I've just got a kick, a snare top, and a pair of overheads here. You can ignore these other ones. Those are our samples that we'll be taking a look at in a minute. So I just spent a couple minutes here and got a real quick mix going of these drums. Let's just take a listen. Okay, so not so awesome. So let's solo up our kick and get into our first reason to use drum samples. And this is probably the most obvious reason to use them, and that's just that the source just sounds bad. So let's listen to this kick. So even with the processing I have going on, I am not digging it. It's got kind of a weird attack to it, and the low end isn't nearly as tight as I would want. So some people would say that, you've just got to kind of work with what you've got, that if a band delivers you bad tracks, that's their fault, and they'll get what they get. And I could probably spend a ton of time processing this kick more and get it to sound a lot better, and it still probably wouldn't sound great. Alternatively, I can either blend in a sample or replace that entirely with a sample, and in about a minute, have a much better sound. And of course, I'm not saying that you should just automatically replace all your drums with samples right away. It's just that if you're processing something for a while and it's just not happening, a lot of the time it'll serve the song better to just get a better sound in there and move on. So before we add in our sample, I want to point out one more thing about this kick drum. I'm going to play it again and listen to how inconsistent the hits are. So on all those double hits, the first one's kind of wimpy and then the second one's much harder. Now you can use a leveler to kind of even those out, and I've actually done that a little bit here, but the tonality of the two hits is so different that it still sounds funny. And obviously sometimes you want the dynamics there, but in this case, it's not really working for me. So this is another case to use drum samples. Even if I really like the sound of this kick, but it was just way too inconsistent, I could mix in a sample, either just a random one from my library, or if it's something that I record, I always grab samples at the end of a session, just have the drummer hit each drum a couple times in case you need them, in which case you could use that sample so it's still the sound of the drummer and his drum kit, but you can just blend that in for a more consistent feel. But in this case, like I said, I don't like the sound of this kick, so we're going to use something totally different. In this case, I'm using my oak kick sample, and by the way, all the samples I'm using here today, I have available over at bettermixes.com/drum samples. So if you're looking for some new sounds, be sure to check those out. But of course, there's a ton of other awesome samples out there as well. So let's listen one more time to what we had before, and then we'll take our original kick out and put in our sample. So that's sounding so much better to me. And like I said, you don't even have to replace it all the way. If you want to leave some of the natural kick in there, maybe we like some of that clickiness from that, we can always blend them to taste, something like this. But in this case, let's just rock with just the sample. So now let's take a look at another use. So like I said, we only have a kick, snare, and overhead mics, no room mic, and this was recorded in a tiny little room that was pretty dead. So we don't have a lot of ambience going on in these drums. I made a video a little while back showing how to make a fake room track. I'll link that up here in the corner. But another way to approach that same problem is to use samples. So in this case, I want some ambience on our snare. So here I loaded up the Indie Snare Room, which is just the room mics for that. And most drum sample packs I've seen have separate room tracks. So you can do this whether you have my samples or Slate samples or the Get Good Drum samples or whatever. So let's listen to just the sample for a second. So I chose the Indie snare here because it's tuned really, really low and really fat, which kind of matches the snare we have in this song. So let's play our drum mix, and I'm going to pop that in and out. So just like that, we can add as little or as much snare room sound as we want. And of course, you can do that on your kick and your toms as well, so that it sounds like your drums were recorded in a much larger room. Let's mute that snare room and go to our next example here. So let's say we like this snare sound, this really kind of deep, thick snare thing, but in the context of the mix, it's not quite cutting through. So maybe we want to add a little extra pop or a little extra crack or something like that to it. This is a great use for drum samples to blend a contrasting sound with your original source. So you can get both a thud and a crack out of your snare, or like we said over here with the kick drum earlier, if we really like the attack on our original one but need a better bottom end, the sample can really help. So in this case, I'm using the bunker snare. Let's take a listen to that. So yeah, that's got that really nice kind of pop to it as compared to our original. So then when we blend them together, so it still has that beefy thud, but now it's got a little bit more life, excitement, and ring to it. And for our final reason to use drum samples today, sometimes you're mixing a song and maybe the snare drum they used while tracking is just not working. I've definitely had this happen on tracks people have sent me to mix. Maybe they've got a really, really high-pitched, pingy snare, and I'm just sitting there thinking about how much better the song would sound with a deep, thuddy snare. Or even if you recorded it yourself, making a not-so-great decision in tracking doesn't mean you necessarily have to commit to that. Obviously, we want to make the best decisions we can during tracking, but sometimes the wrong ones happen. So in this case, let's say we are not into this deep, thuddy snare we have going on. So we want to replace it with the garage snare sample. This snare is quite a bit higher pitched than our original and much, much more aggressive. Let's hear that. And in context, of course, we'll mute our original. Actually, we'll swap back and forth. So this is the original. And the new. So in just a matter of minutes, we were able to change our drums from this to this. So hopefully this video gave you some ideas. And again, if you can get awesome drum sounds without samples, fantastic. But I just want to talk about how samples are just a tool, just like compression or EQ or whatever, and that they have their place and they have their purpose. And sometimes they can be the difference between giving a band a mediocre mix and a great one. So if you guys found this video helpful, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And like I said, if you want to check these drum samples out, I'll put a link in the description down below, or just head on over to bettermixes.com/drum samples.